Hey PCWorld fans, Adam here with Will. And Will, this is yet another GP review.
I feel like we just did this.
We did actually just do this, but this time it's for Team Red. We have a new GPU, the AMD Radeon RX 7900 GRE.
The graduate readiness exam?
Yes. No, the Golden Rabbit Edition.
Oh!
So this card actually launched mid last year, but it was China only and it was SI only. So it was a good card, but you couldn't get it here. Now, AMD is releasing it here to the US at a crisp $550. We're going to cover it, not only game benchmarks at 1440p and 4K, we're going to talk about power draw, thermals a little bit, and then also give a little tease of some content creation workloads. So let's get into it. So this card is a known quantity. It has been out. Actually, some people have reviewed it. They imported it from China and reviewed it. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly. The numbers are pretty, easy to kind of comprehend. It's $50 more than the 7800 XT, and guess what? It's a little bit more performance on top of that,
But a lot cheaper than the GTX.
Yeah, well, no, they're positioning it against the RTX 4070 non-super, which is also now at $550. And I think that's why they're bringing it out now, is because the super variants have launched and the vanilla 4070 has dropped down to $550. By AMD's own admission, they say that it's 14% more FPS per dollar than the regular 4070. So we're going to look at those numbers, but essentially, you should just think of this as kind of a souped-up 7800 XT. Like it's same amount of RAM, same bus width, same power requirements, all that kind of stuff. It's just
a little bit faster,
a little bit more. Yeah. It's almost like a 7800 XT Super. No, it's a GRE. So the last thing to note. It's called the GRE because it was the Golden Rabbit Edition. It came out in China, and it was, in relation to the fact that it was the year of the rabbit.
It's Adam. It's not the year of the rabbit here now.
Not the year of the rabbit anymore. So it should have been GDE, the year of the dragon. Whatever. It's a name.
Look, at least it's not the named after the test that you take when you want to go to get a master's or a PhD. So that's a win in my front.
No more tests for me. I just run the benchmarks. Last thing to note is that this is one of the newer Radeon cards, so it has access to AFMF, the fluid motion frame stuff, all the HyperRX suite of features, AV1, all that kind of fun stuff that is available on the other GPUs. The same thing applies here. So
fully functional.
Yeah. I did not do a ton of testing with the extra features. I just mostly ran, kind of the main suite of things. But I put it up against the 7800 XT, the vanilla 4070 that I have here, which is an Asus dual OC edition, which retails for actually about $530. So it comes in just a little bit cheaper than I've seen it on the street, but officially the 4070 is $550. I do have the rest of the super cards because we just did the testing in there, just for context. So
okay,
you can look at it.
Makes a lot of sense.
But we're going to start off with a synthetic benchmark. Most of the time I like to do real world stuff, but at least get one synthetic in there just for some information. This is 3D Mark Speedway. It's a DX12 Ultimate benchmark. So this is a synthetic benchmark that throws everything, including the kitchen sink, at these cards, just to see how they do under really
full load, top to bottom.
Yeah. Even features like ray tracing, direct storage, things like that. It tests against, and as we see. Actually, the Radeon cards don't do that well against NVIDIA cards. Some of this does come down to the fact that NVIDIA has more oomph when it comes to ray tracing features. But at the same time, if you look at the GRE, it is pretty much lockstep with the dual. So yeah, I
mean, just generally speaking, it's close enough that it doesn't matter. The thing I care least about is synthetic benchmarks.
Exactly, yeah. And what we can see is a lot of these synthetic benchmarks don't actually reflect real-world experience, so let's actually get into some real-world benchmarks. I will say we're going to start off with 1440p, then we're going to go to 4K, and then we're going to do features like ray tracing and upscaling, just to kind of keep things separated. So first up is Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p with the Ultra preset, which even without ray tracing is still a pretty intensive test to do. As we can see though, AMD has a really good advantage over that dual. I mean, we're talking about a little over 30 frames between the 4070 non-super and this GRE.
This has got to be memory capacity, because what's the 4070? The 4070 non-super is, they're both 12 gigs, aren't they?
The non-super is 12 gigs. This is 16 gigs. So,
yeah, so
it's 4 extra gigs.
That's 4 more. It's maybe an important 4 gigs.
But
in this
a wider memory bus as well. So 256 versus 192. So it could be a couple of those factors.
This is ray tracing off, though. So
this is ray tracing off.
It's the more raster, less ray tracing, no global illumination. All
exactly,
that kind of stuff.
exactly. So either way, a big win for the GRE. Yeah. We're going to move over to Returnal. Same thing, 1440p at the Epic preset, which is the highest. And man, that lead over that 4070 is pretty nice. I mean, in fact, it actually beats out the Super variant as well.
And Returnal's interesting because it's a PS5 launch window game. Mm-hmm. It uses a little bit of ray tracing, but not enough. It's, I think, fairly comparable to what we can expect from PS5 and Xbox Series ports to PC for the remainder of this generation.
For sure, for sure. Now let's move over to something a little older and something a little lighter to run, which is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This is on the highest preset in DX12 mode. And here, the gap actually tightens a little bit, but still technically bigger bar better on the AMD side. Next up is Rainbow Six Siege, which is the test that I use for competitive high FPS games. And here, it's the same kind of thing. Still lead over that 4070, but not as much as we saw in a couple of the earlier benchmarks. Either way, I mean, we're talking about over 400 frames per second, so
10, 20 frames matters a lot less at 400 frames a second than it does at 60 frames a second.
Exactly. So let's move over to F1 2022.
Holy cow!
And holy cow! I mean, we're talking about high frame rates here, but also jumping. I mean, that's about 50 frames. Between the 4070,
20-ish, 25% bump there. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that is pretty good. Last up on the 1440p is Watch Dogs Legion. This also reports the 1% lows, so we get a little indication here that even though that GRE is beating the 4070 non-super in averages, the 1% lows are actually a lot tighter. We've kind of seen this before. The NVIDIA cards just have a little bit tighter of the average versus the 1% lows than the AMD cards.
Well, I mean, I think NVIDIA has devoted a lot of effort to reducing microstutter. It's something they've identified as something they're concerned with.
Which is important.
Yeah, and
that's the overall smoothness of a game.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that work here.
Yeah. So now let's move over to 4K, because even though this card is aimed at 1440p, it does have 4 more gigs of VRAM than the 4070 non-super, and hopefully it should be a little better suited for 4K. Or another way to think about it is 1440p for future titles. So not a lot of people upgrade their monitors all the time, so maybe they just want to see how it'll do 1440p now, but then 1440p in the future. 4K is kind of maybe a little bit of an indication of how it'll do in 1440p later. So coming back to Cyberpunk, that gap widens up. We get a smooth 30 on that 4070, but we're now jumping up to a little bit more than 40, which is Steam Deck kind of frames. Better than the 4070, and actually better than the super variants, but
it's a little slower than I'd hoped for in a full desktop computer.
Yeah, I mean, it's doable. It's doable for sure.
This is the situation where I'd turn the resolution down or turn the upscaling up and use DLSS or FSR or whatever is your option in this case.
Yeah. So moving over to Returnal, actually the GRE passes that nice smooth 60 frames per second, where the vanilla 4070 is not quite there.
The benchmarks here say playable as heck to me.
Playable as heck. You know what else is playable as heck? Is Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 4K. The gap not only kind of gets a little bit closer to that 4070 dual, but also that 7800 XT at 4K is still doing over 60 frames per second for about $50 cheaper.
This split here tells me there's a bottleneck someplace, and it's probably not the video card.
Yeah. So next up is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege at 4K, and I forgot to mention that this one with the Ultra preset defaults to a 50% render. So this is actually not rendering at 4K. The 1440p wasn't rendering at 1440p.
It's rendering at 1080p or 720p basically.
50% render from 4K. So actually I think it's 1080p internal. So Yeah, but I mean that's pretty good frame rate still. You know, I'm not a competitive gamer, but you know, over 240 frames a second seems pretty good to me.
Not over 9,000, but it's close enough.
Not over 9,000, not yet, not yet. F1 2022, same kind of results here, and that GRE beats the super variants even. On Watch Dogs Legion, we see that kind of same thing. The 1% lows, the gap between the average and the 1% lows is a little bit wider than what's on the 4070, but the 1% lows are higher on that GRE. It's just under 60.
Yeah, and that's a good place to be.
Yeah. So, you know, that's 1440p, that's 4K. I actually do think this card does position itself pretty well versus the 4070. I mean, I didn't do the math to like find the average of the tests that I did. AMD, once again, is claiming, I think I said, what, 17%? And
is that their dollars per frame rate?
Oh, yeah. No, it was 14% more FPS per dollar in their testing.
What does that mean? That means nothing to me.
I don't know. Either way, I mean, if you're looking at $550 for one card or the other and take out other features, then, I mean, in pure raster, the AMD one does seem to do a little bit better. Even though those 1% lows are not as tighter, you're still getting more out of the AMD card. Yeah. And it is kind of just a souped up version of the 7800 XT. And even in some cases, it beats out the non-super variants, which are a healthy increase over the super.
I mean, I think the performance was compelling on what we've seen so far. I'm curious how the ray tracing stacks up.
Yeah, well, that's when we start talking about the other stuff. So now let's get into ray tracing and upscaling. I'll say the way that I tested this is thinking that if you're going to run some sort of ray tracing features, that you're probably going to use upscaling at the same time. So that's the way I ran it. And in this case, I know that DLSS in some cases can actually be more performant and have better quality, but to keep things even across the whole testing thing, I just use FSR, but no frame generation. This is just upscaling, and the RT features kind of depend on the game and you know, the implementation. But I've got two examples here. First up is Cyberpunk 2077, and you've said in the past this is a good indication of like bleeding edge PC implementation of ray tracing.
Yeah, this is the state of the art.
Intense.
Right, yeah. Path traced, everything turned up all the way. Even on medium, it's still much more than you're seeing in most of the console ports that are shipping today.
So the numbers here for Cyberpunk, this is the RT medium preset, which is not the full path tracing.
It's not the full path tracing.
But FSR set to balanced, which means that at 1440p, it's coming in above 720p but below 1080p, and I mean that's a pretty usable 82 frames per second.
Yeah, and just to be clear, realistically, we realize if you're using an NVIDIA card, you're probably going to run DLSS here.
Exactly.
If you're using AMD, you're going to run FSR, just so you can compare apples to apples.
Exactly.
And yeah, this is super playable. This is a really great performance 1440p with ray tracing on.
Yeah. You tune it up to 4K though, and things, you know, drop down a little bit more. With 4K and FSR balanced, you're rendering above 1080p there. So the image quality, at least when I was watching the benchmark, wasn't bad. But you know, the smoothness is probably going to be a problem.
I mean, just to be clear, none of the cards that you tested in this roundup, 4080 Supers on down, did more than 60 frames a second at this preset. So, like the fact that you're on a $500 card, $550 card, you're seeing 50 frames a second, pretty good.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to play it at this resolution.
Yeah, and once again, this is like, you know, even though I didn't do the full path trace mode, which I think all these cards are going to struggle with in these settings, the RT medium with the settings they have in there is still pretty impactful. What's more likely is that we're going to start seeing more games that have console quality ray tracing implementations in them, and I used Returnal to kind of see the examples of that. So once again, this is 1440p with the Epic preset, RT on and FSR set to balanced, and I mean we're seeing almost 120 frames per second, but the dual, that 4070 does beat it out just by a smidge.
Just by a small fraction. This is a respectable, it's respectable pass, especially at this resolution.
And once again, I think an indication of how things will be at least for the foreseeable future is console-style implementations. So real light ray tracing.
This is your Last of Us's, your Spider-Man's, your
that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I also ran it at 4K, and here, you know what? Interesting. At 1440p, it lagged behind the 4070 just by a little bit, when we turn it up to 4K, it actually beats it out just by a little bit.
I think we're seeing the benefits of a little more memory on the AMD card at this this mark.
Yeah, so I would say these are playable frame rates. Once again, I didn't have time to do all the testing and try different kinds of setting configurations. But I felt like this was kind of a good balance and kind of a good look to compare all of them.
To be clear, each lap of tests is what, 3/4 of a day to a day, depending on how things go?
For each GPU.
Each GPU, yeah.
So it's about a day per GPU. I did all these GPUs. So
12 GPUs.
Yeah,
it's a lot. That's a lot of testing.
It's a lot to do by myself. Yeah. So, but that's just the gaming benchmarks. That's one side of the equation because there's other things to consider. Next up, let's talk about the power draw and the thermals and how that equates to each other. And when we look at the power draw of this card, this is actually rated at 260 watts, but I saw a maximum of 330 in F1 2022 at 1440p on a loop.
This is measured with software?
This is software, yeah. This is a HW monitor on, and then just reporting the highest spike that it saw. And I mean,
that's
pretty high. We definitely, yeah. I mean, this trend, this is not new. Obviously, all these AMD cards actually turned in even more power draw than the highest end 4080 that we have on here. So, efficiency isn't necessarily the strong suit of AMD.
No.
It has been known already to kind of take more power. More importantly, though, to some, is heat. So does that translate to more heat? And actually, this card with this triple cooler, this Hellhound, is one of the coolest cards on the chart that I have here, turning in during the same test, running F1 2022 for a bunch of loops and just seeing the peak is 58 degrees Celsius. So
I mean, that's a testament to the PowerColor cooler. Means the GPU is still cranking out the heat. The cooler is just dissipating it more effectively
for sure
than on some of these other cards. Which, I mean, I guess that's a win. My office is still going to get warmer than it would if I had one of the cooler cards in.
Yes, definitely. But I mean, it is nice that even though it has really high power draws, like
they're managing.
Yeah, they're managing somehow. Some of it's the shroud, some of it's other implementations. But yeah, if you're worried about heat, I wouldn't have to worry about it too much. The last thing for benchmarks I want to show off is a couple quick video editing benchmarks. I'm working on a really big comparison chart, and we're going to go into all the numbers for video editing applications. So stay tuned to that, but I wanted to give just a little taste on this. First up is Premiere Pro, and we can see it kind of fall in line the same way as the gaming benchmarks to a certain degree, because it's not always analogous, but it is turning in a little bit better score on this overall score compared to the 7800 XT, and is pretty much right in line with the 4070 Dual. Depending on your workload, depending on the codecs, things like that, it's going to impact. That's why you got to look at the subscores, which we'll do in a later video. We're just teasing it now. I'll also tease DaVinci Resolve, and we see that at this level, DaVinci Resolve definitely likes more VRAM, and guess what? You get more VRAM on the AMD side.
It seems like all of the NVIDIA cards and AMD cards with 16 gigs of RAM fall in the same gap, and seeing the same thing happening here.
Yeah, but if you want to see the deeper subscores, definitely tune in for that video. Boy, that's going to be a doozy. But we should probably wrap this one up with a couple kind of final thoughts on the actual card itself. I will say that even though the 7900 GRE is going to retail or starting at $550, I don't have the final pricing for this PowerColor Hellhound.
Wait, I see it right there, Adam.
Oh yeah, it's right.
It's right there.
Oh, is it right over there?
Right down here.
No, I don't know if I'm going to have it by
Maybe
the time
up
I
there.
publish. It could be, or it could not be on here.
Yeah, it might not be here at all.
Yeah, who knows? But this is a larger cooler, especially compared to this ASRock Challenger, which, as we can see, it cooled it more efficiently. But obviously, will take a little bit more space. These fans.
They have two different size fans.
Two different size fans, but they do all three light up RGB, which is real nice. It does have a little LED switch toggle on the back here.
Can you control the colors independently?
No. So unfortunately, it's pretty minimal in terms of what you can do, but it does look nice if you appreciate that. It has two 8-pin power connectors, just like the 7800 XT, but this 4070 only has one. 8-pin power connector because obviously it's
needs
using
one,
less
yeah.
juice. But this Hellhound does have a BIOS switch for OC in silent mode. The 7800 XT, this Challenger, does not.
You had that thing in OC mode, right?
I had this in OC mode.
Okay,
yes, correct.
that's good.
But yeah, I didn't do any sort of sound testing. I actually did. I don't feel like I have the tools necessary to do like actual real good sound testing, so I'd rather not put out crappy numbers. So I didn't do that, but I do like the aesthetics. I mean, that's very much down to a personal preference. The size of it is a little bit larger, so if that is a consideration, but what you get out of it is nicer cooling, so I do appreciate that. You can tell that the PCB design is actually roughly similar on these. This just adds a lot more of the fin stack and a little bit of a flow-through design on the top plate here. So
It's a nice looking board.
yeah, not bad. It's actually I think this might be the first time I've ever messed around with a PowerColor GPU. It is not a AIB that I'm super familiar with. So
It also has the mount plate for your cross braces, if that's the thing you care about.
yeah. Well, I mean, and maybe this also points into the fact that this came out as an SI card, so that's definitely an SI feature, a system integrator feature for those who don't know what an SI is. So yeah, all in all, the 7900 GRE I think is positioned really well, and I'm glad that it's another option out there. Is it $50 better than the 7800 XT? I don't know. That's kind of up to you and where your budget is at. It does perform better, so I think if you can swing it, it'll help just give you a little bit more of a life to it.
I mean, we saw playable frame rates and everything at 1440p. 4K was a little soft on the more intensive benchmarks like the Cyberpunk with ray tracing on, but respectable card for $550.
Yeah, and then when you compare to the 4070, which is still going to stick around, even though they have 4070 Supers now, I think it's that age-old debate between NVIDIA and AMD, right? There's definitely been plenty of talk over the years of the drivers and just not being as stable as NVIDIA, or the NVIDIA suite just has a lot more options in it compared to AMD. I will say the options that AMD has available to it is pretty close to parity. The quality is always kind of hit or miss, but I don't feel like running an AMD card you're going to miss out on a ton of stuff unless you know that you want some of those features. But a lot of times people will buy stuff thinking like, okay, well, I might not use those features, but if I do, I'm glad to have them.
I mean, I think before FSR2, there was an argument that DLSS was a kind of deciding feature for a lot of people. I think that's less of a concern these days. The DLSS 3 and 3.5 frame gen stuff and the FSR 3 frame gen is interesting, but kind of still feels really situational to me. It's not something I turn on in every game for sure, even if it supports it.
Yeah. It depends. I mean, I love bells and whistles. I love ray tracing and all that kind of stuff. So, NVIDIA cards are better suited for that. Also, CUDA performance, where you need it, is obviously a strong advantage. And just, I wouldn't fault anyone for going for the NVIDIA option, for sure. But, I do feel like AMD has a compelling product here.
And I think realistically at this price range, the kind of ray tracing you're looking at being able to play games at rather than just load them up and see how pretty it's going to look in the future is the console port stuff like Returnal, not the Cyberpunk path tracing, right?
Exactly.
So, whether you're buying NVIDIA or AMD, you're not going to get to where you want to be at resolutions you're going to play at with path tracing on probably. So, it matters less than it does at the high end.
Yeah, and once again, you're getting four more VRAMs. So like if you have something that is going to need more VRAM, maybe you're doing a lot of AI inference or large language model training, things like that. Maybe that's something that appeals to you, or like we saw with DaVinci Resolve, definitely can take advantage of the VRAM. I think that's definitely something to consider. So yeah, that's the review of the PowerColor Hellhound 7900 RX 7900 GRE. It's interesting that it's come out here, but I do think now is a good time, and hopefully this will be the last GPU to review in a while, because man, it has been hot and heavy. I have not even gotten to the 7600 XT, because that's kind of a little bit further down the stack. So maybe we'll come back and check that out later.
I can hardly wait.
Yeah, yeah, I know you can't. And I know you can't either, so be sure to subscribe here on PC World for more PC hardware and software goodness. Until the next one, we'll catch you later.